Welcome to another edition of One on One with Mitch Lafon. Joining me this week, famed record producer Tom Werman. He actually helped create the soundtrack of my life, having produced albums by Cheap Trick, Motley Crue, Twisted Sister, Stryper, and more. And so I talked to Tom about all of that. I asked him about working with Canadian band Glass Tiger, what he thinks of Nikki Sixx and Motley Crue. Same for Dee Snider and Twisted Sister. What it is to be a good producer, using or the use of ghost musicians, and a lot more. This is a 1 hour interview. We go into all kinds of minutia. We gotta love that. The only sad part or the regret would be that I didn't have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours, because we were on a train that just kept a rolling, and unfortunately Tom had a prior commitment at the time after, and so had to bail out on us, or not bail out on us, but had to go, which was fair enough. But just a great conversation. And so sit back, enjoy this one. Head over to the One on One with Mitch Lafon Facebook page and find the posting of this show there, and leave some comments. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What questions would you ask Tom? Because I could certainly do a part 2. If you like what you hear on the One-on-One podcast, before we get over to Tom Werman, head over to iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, TuneIn, and Stitcher. Find the show, leave a positive comment. Look me up also on Twitter at Mitch Lafon. There's also a Twitter for the One-on-One show. Hey, it's only rock and roll to me. Here is the one, the only, probably one of my favorite record producers, Tom Werman. We are speaking with producer Tom Werman, who, for me, has put together essentially the soundtrack of my life, whether it's a Cheap Trick album or a Motley Crue album, or even a Glass Tiger album. There are albums I sort of all wore out. So good day, Tom.
Great. I love to hear that, and thank you for letting me do this, Mitch.
It's my pleasure. And in fact, as a fan of a lot of the stuff you've done, and I really literally mean that they were the soundtrack. I mean, the fact that, In Color probably was the only album I listened to for a period of 2 years, and then Dream Police, and then Shout at the Devil, and Open Up and Say, oh, I mean,
yeah.
And I want to get into that after. Let's get all the fun stuff first, because I know some of these people have criticized and said, well, and I don't get it. I don't get how you can have a 5 million selling album and go, it didn't sound right. Oh, please.
Well, exactly what I my words.
But I like to start positive. So let me start straight up front with Stone Over Farm, which is your bed and breakfast out in the Berkshires, a place that I've stayed. It is an incredible retreat. I mean, if you're tired at work, or you just want to get away, or you're having a great life and you just want to have a greater life, it is a fantastic property. So why don't we just tell the folks a little bit about that, how you got into it, how they can book a reservation if they want, because I think they should.
Yeah, well,
how do you go from LA, sleaze rock, Motley Crue, party to a remote part of Massachusetts? And
it's easy. You turn 55.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and once you're 55, you're burnt a little bit on what you've been doing for 25 years, 30 years, and the industry is tired of you, because let's face it, when you're 55, it's a stretch to make records that are meaningful for teenagers.
Agreed.
You just do not share much of anything. And I had made 60 records. I was ready to continue, but I was feeling a little bit samey. I was feeling that I had, over the years, I had developed some approaches to producing records that I could not help but repeat from time to time, because they worked. And I started to feel a little bit guilty about not being totally fresh from a creative point of view every time I approached a record, because There were certain things, certain tricks that I had, certain
Right.
procedures.
But to be fair, the albums you were making were in a similar genre, and the record companies wanted that sort of proven, A goes to B, B goes to C, slot this here, slot this there. All right, perfect. We got another hit record. So
right.
I know
but when we had gotten to the point, or I had gotten to the point where I had a way of, there was the power ballad approach. I called it the kitchen sink approach, where I was very good at power ballads, and I had a really difficult time making one different from the next in terms of structure, and arrangement. And I would just I just felt that it was beginning not to be quite as exciting, and it was a little more step one, step two, step three. Okay, we're halfway. Now we have to do this. I even had a kind of a formula for sequencing records. I'd take the worst song, in my opinion, and put it next to last on side 2. Reason being that you didn't want the listener to walk away from the album with the worst song in his head.
Right.
So you would tuck it into the next to last slot on side 2, which I called the turkey slot, and you'd put the best song first on side 1. You'd put the next best song second on side 1, and the third best song would be first on side 2. And I had come to do this because I had found over the years that this was the best way. These things worked, and I don't know. What do you do for a living? Well, I make records. Oh, that's so exciting. That's fantastic. Well, yes, but not so much anymore. Not so much right now. After 60 albums, honestly, it takes a rare bird, and there are a few, to continue past, the age of 55 as a record producer and still make vital hit records. Or make
you do realize, though, that everybody listening, including myself, are going to run to all those albums I just mentioned and look at the before last track and say, "Oh, that's the bad one." Right?
That's right.
We're all going to be.
Look, I think they'll find that it's true. But remember, it's from my perspective. Everyone has his or her own favorite track and least favorite track. So anyway, but that's funny. That's
what I'm going to be doing after this. So before we get into some of the minutia of the certain albums and certain people and certain things, let's just trace the origins. Where did you come from in terms of, I'm now the studio producer for, I guess, CBS or Sony, I guess it was, right? Columbia? Were you working for Columbia?
At that point, it was Epic Records.
Epic, okay.
Because Columbia didn't have any job openings, but Clive wanted to hire me. So he put me in Epic Records working as the assistant to the director of A&R. And that was great for me. I was a little disappointed because I didn't know much about Epic, and it was the little sister label. It had some interesting artists at the time.
Right.
It had the Dave Clark 5. We had Sly. Donovan had been on Epic.
Right.
And a few of the Yardbirds had been on Epic.
But where did you come from? I mean, did you pop out of the University of Boston and fresh face? Let's just hire this guy, or what was the training? What was sort of the route?
No, it was all illogical. There was no probable career path. I was an Ivy League prep school Northeast guy. I was supposed to be trained to be a CEO, go into business, do something wonderful, and I really didn't know what I was doing at all. None of us did at that age, and so I elected to go to work on Madison Avenue, and I was writing marketing plans for Gain detergent and Jif peanut butter, And
There you
I
go.
was really unhappy. I mean, really unhappy, so that I didn't even want to get out of bed in the morning. And I wrote a letter to Clive Davis, and I said, listen, I'm a musician. I love rock and roll. I love music. It's all I think about. I do have a very good job, and I have an MBA, but I'd rather be working for you. And really, when you're looking for a job, it's much better to have a job, because you're really dealing from a position of strength,
Right.
rather than saying, I have no job, please give me one.
Right.
So,
you don't come off as desperate.
Right. So Clive, he handed the letter down to the head of marketing, and I started interviewing. And eventually, the one guy said, I want you to meet with Clive. And this was an audience with the Pope. So
Absolutely.
I met with Clive. He hired me on the spot. And he said, this is a good position for you, and we need some help here. And so in 1970, I left the ad agency after a year and walked across town and started work at the CBS building, the magnificent CBS building at 52nd and 6th, Black Rock. And I mean, they handed me an American Express card and said, go find us the next big thing. And I had an office with a piano and a stereo and a window, and I had a budget and a travel and expense budget. And if I heard something like Reo Speedwagon, which I heard in the first few weeks, I was entitled or expected to fly out to Champaign, Illinois, and see them. And I did, and I said, this is great. So I signed Reo Speedwagon right away.
Wow. I mean, this story, by the way, this story doesn't happen in 2015. I mean, this is
no
sign of the times, right?
I know about the difference because my son,
right,
Daniel, is in A&R at Interscope, and we talk. And he, I am aghast. I mean, he's got a great gig. He works for a great guy. It's a great label, and it's part of Universal, which is a big machine.
Yep.
But the way they do things and how they have to do them is far more difficult than what we did. I mean, I have to, people say, oh, look what you did, and look how you did it at that, and I have to remind them that the record business was literally exploding. I mean, people were buying records hand over fist, and more and more and more every year. And if you had a hit record, you could sell 3 million copies. It doesn't happen anymore. So
no, and they also don't hire the gain guy, to come in and be the producer. I mean, so what made them think you could produce? Did they sit down with some demos and say, okay, well, how would you arrange these? Did they anything, or did they just say, listen, see if you can work with this band?
No, actually, I kind of wormed my way in, if you'll pardon me.
Of course.
I when I signed Ted, I went into the studio. You see, when I signed Ted Nugent, I didn't understand much about the record business. I only understood music. And Ted had a production deal. It was a production deal. So someone owned him. Lou Futterman brought him to me. He said, Ted Nugent is available. There's no more Amboy Dukes.
Right.
And so I investigated it, and I went to see Ted, and I just loved him. And I signed him, and I didn't even think about the producer at the time. In fact, what I wanted to do was to get Pete Townsend to produce Ted Nugent. I actually suggested it to his to Pete's attorney, Mina Myback.
Right.
And she convinced me that it was really not. It wasn't really a good thing for Pete at that time, and I completely understood. But the deal is that when they went to make the record, oh my God, this guy who owns Ted's, production contract is going to be the producer. So I was nervous about it and concerned, and I went into the studio to try to protect my investment because I was very anxious to have a hit. I had tried to sign Kiss and Leonard Skinner and Rush in the years right after Reo Speedwagon, and my boss passed on all of them. So when I got to Ted, it was under a new boss who was much more willing to listen to me, and so I said, "Geez, this really has to fly," because it's been 5 years I've been here, and I haven't really done anything to hang my hat on. So I went into the studio and I started to make suggestions, and I started to do this and I started to do that, and Ted liked what I was saying, and eventually, by the time the album was over, this guy Lou Futterman, who was the producer, decided to give me co-production credit. He made me the co-producer.
Right.
And then the album went nuts. And so, look, hey, bingo! I had, all of a sudden, I was the co-producer of a multi-million selling album, and so they said, "Bada bing, you're a producer." Alakazam. and then, well, Jack Douglas had asked me to go see Cheap Trick because he
produced the first album.
He had seen them, and I went out and I signed them. And Jack did the first album, but when it came time to do the second album, he was busy with Aerosmith, so they asked me to do it. And I said, "Oh, wow, okay." I'd never done a record on my own, but In Color was the first production, the first solo album I ever did. So that was, I guess, it was successful enough so that they just told me to go make records. And that was my new job, because In Color was Rolling Stone's album of the year, and that did it for us. So I was off, and then I just produced the bands that I signed until I left CBS.
So let me start exploring some of these. First of all, you mentioned that you were interested in Kiss and Rush. If you had signed them, would you have changed any of their sort of career projection? Would you have tried to make Kiss a softer band or a more ballad? I mean, how did you see, looking back, I know it's sort of hard now to look back, but what do you think you would have tried to do with them? Because Rush was very sort of cerebral and Kiss was very, from the groin. Would you have done anything or just taken it the way it is?
No, I was really impressed with Rush, and it was a kind of a very artsy form of rock music, progressive, really. Yeah. And it was beyond. These guys obviously knew, how to read and write, how to play really well, and they knew theory, and they were advanced, and it was much more refined than the stuff that I was used to listening to and dealing with. And I would have let it alone.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I really, it was new and different and interesting. With Kiss, it was a little more comfortable for me, but I wasn't really interested in taking control and directing a band to go in this direction or that direction. I was trying to be a collaborator. I mean, certain bands, certain people out there have a very interesting historical perspective on what we did, and it differs from mine.
We'll cover that in a few. I want to try to get all the fun stuff up front, and I want to keep Cheap Trick for a little bit later because I love the band. I love the 3 albums: Heaven Tonight, Dream Police, and In Color.
I love the band too. I think they're the best. It was the high point of my career.
Oh, and they're still just a very real band. They're still, you go to a Cheap Trick show and it's Cheap Trick playing. It's not loops, it's not tapes, it's not tricks. Right. Right? And no pun intended. So let me get to them.
It's also not funny.
It is not bunny, and that's a bit of a sad twist. That's I know.
Uh,
I mean, I wasn't there. The story is that Rob and Xander and Bunny had a falling out, and they fired him, sort of fired him, whatever you want to call it. And you know,
yeah.
it is what it is, right? All right, let me start, since I'm Canadian. Let me start with a Canadian band, and we'll work our way backwards.
Okay.
Glass Tiger.
Yeah.
The album is Simple Mission. Came
Yeah.
out in '91. Uh, Alan Frew, who of course is the singer for Glass Tiger, I spoke to him just last week. He sends you his best. He just had a stroke and he's recovering from that, unfortunately.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'm
yeah,
glad he's recovering though.
yeah. And he's actually got a new album coming out this month in November 6th. So it's cover songs. He's redoing songs from the '80s and '90s, which is cool.
That's always good.
Simple Mission. You've got Rod Stewart on it. You've got you've got this band. The band had been hot. They had a whole bunch of stuff. It went platinum in Canada. Doesn't really make a dent in the States. Nobody
Right.
cares. Um, and a few years ago when I actually stayed at your bed and breakfast, you gave me a CD which I think you call your hit and misses, or your greatest hits and your biggest misses, or something like that. Which I
Yeah.
have.
Greatest hits and greatest misses. Yeah.
Right, I have that downstairs, and Glass Tiger is on that greatest misses thing because it just didn't have that. What
Yeah.
was that like working with them?
Blinded. Right.
Yeah,
It's Blinded.
the song. Yep,
What a
absolutely.
great. I'm so proud of the way of that song, and what I did, my little contribution. I mean, they were really great pop band. They were a pop band as far as I'm concerned, and I love pop.
Yep.
And I can't, you know, I could listen to Blinded all day and all night. They were a really smart, clever, good band. There may have been a little difference between the Canadian, I don't know, between what's good in Canada, what's good in America.
Yep.
A lot of artists made the transition. A lot of Canadian artists were big in the States. I don't get it, honestly. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, the album before that they had done was Diamond Sun, tons of hit singles, and a lot of good stuff, and they were going up against Bryan Adams, and they were trying to carve in or follow his path, and
Yeah,
America just didn't want to. I mean, and I guess you can't explain it other than maybe it's just sort of cultural differences, I guess, right?
possibly. But, I don't know. Maybe they were just a little too polite, a little too smooth. It was pretty slick,
Yeah.
that album.
And the band still
I take
exists.
responsibility for that.
The band still exists. They still do shows. Before Alan had his thing, but they'll be doing shows again soon. But are you proud of that album? Do you think you did a good job, or do you ever?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, and especially, yeah. I mean, listen to that album. It's good. It rocks. It's well mixed. It's well played. It's well sung. It's everything about it is just fine, and the songs are too.
Yep.
I mean, it only takes one or two hits to sell to make a hit album. Blinded, as far as I'm concerned, was a hit.
Oh, it absolutely. And listen, it was a hit in Canada. It just,
Okay.
for some
Yeah.
reason, it didn't. Recently.
And then there was one with Rod Stewart on it. Was that My Town?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and
Oh, in fact, I want to ask you about that. Working with Rod Stewart. I mean, I know that you worked with Motley Crue and you had all the big stuff, but that's still Rod Stewart. It's sort of like having Paul McCartney show up on a session. How was
No.
that for you?
but I didn't work with him.
Oh, okay.
They did. They
Okay.
did. They took it. We finished it, and then I think Alan probably he knew Rod, and I think he went to Rod's studio or a studio with Rod, and they put him in.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember working with
Wow.
Rod. No.
How's that then, being the producer of an album, and then all of a sudden you hear, wait, we had Rod Stewart on this? What? How did that happen?
Yeah. No. We planned to do it.
Okay.
We knew he was going to sing on it.
Right.
You know, it was a Scottish thing.
Of course, he's a
Yeah.
he's a proud Scotsman. I
Yeah.
recently interviewed Michael Sweet of Stryper,
Yeah.
and you did the album Against the Law, and I spoke to Michael about the image change, the change of how the album cover looked. They got rid of the Isaiah thing. They got rid of the black and gold or black and yellow.
Yeah.
The album was sort of a different approach, a contrived different approach. And he said to me in the interview that the songs, the production, he loves it, everything's great. But he says he regrets the album, but mostly because of they were trying to be contrived into being something they weren't. Like he wasn't taking a shot at you at all. Do you feel that that album was contrived? Do you think that it was smart of them to change their whole being, their whole look, and what do you think
Oh,
musically of it?
I musically it was fine. I mean, I always thought that they were not, I think, quite equipped to compete in that hard rock arena because they had a mission. It was a
Right,
Christian mission,
right.
and that I really do believe. I loved the guys. We had a great time. They were wonderful people, really good people, all of them. But I do feel that they chose the medium of music and rock and roll music to get to deliver the word. And that it wasn't just, boy, let's play rock and roll. I love rock and roll. I have to, this has to come out of me. I don't want to take anything away from them, but I do think that they were, kind of had to work a little harder because it wasn't
Right.
just let's rock. It's let's deliver a message in a way that, through rock music that is going to be very acceptable and palatable to teenagers. And those are the people we want to reach with this message.
Did you ever sit them down or anybody at the record company sit them down and say, listen, can we just forget the message and make, a
So I,
guy meets girl, guy breaks up with girl kind of song and let's get on with
well,
this?
well, that's what they said.
Right. And that's what
That's what
Against
they
the Law was.
wanted to do, and I would never. I had no connection with the record label. Again, I just tried to help the band deliver, their artistic vision. I was hired by a band to help
Right.
make the record. That's what a producer does. But never got involved with any artistic direction, image, anything like that.
Are you proud of the record though? Do you regret it? Do you think they made a false move?
No,
No.
no. I think if they're happy with the record, on face value, then I mean on its face, then I'm happy.
Right.
It's not my favorite record, but I don't. There's nothing I regret about it. No, not at all.
Now,
Because when it's all said and done, when I mix a record,
right.
I always actually insist on the leader of the band or a designated person from the band to be there and approve the mixes, because I don't want somebody coming back later, like several have, and saying, "Wow, this just wasn't right. I didn't like this," and you approved it, babe. You approved it. And then we turned it in, and that was that.
Well, okay. Let's get into some of those that have come back because there's sort
Yeah.
of there's a triple crown of people that have complained about Tom Werman. They take the $1 million or the million sales, and then they've turned around. So let's start off with Dee Snider. Stay Hungry
Mm.
is by far their greatest album. I happen to
Mm,
love Dee. I think Dee's great. I love that he's open and he speaks his mind. I love all that.
he's not, well, okay.
But I listen. I don't have to do business with him, so we, it's a different side of the, different perspective. But they re-recorded "Stay Hungry" to make it sound the way it was supposed to sound. Um,
Well,
let,
you say
let's start with that.
they re-recorded it.
Right.
It sold 25, roughly, as far as I know, about 25,000 albums. He, in his book, someone told me that he said, I ruined the album. I ruined an album that sold 5 million copies.
Right. Their only album that sold 5 million copies.
Yeah. And can someone explain this to me? This, I'm not going to dwell on this, but I will say that I have never come across anyone who approaches the hypocrisy of Dee Snider. He was Mr. X until we finished the album, and then he was Mr. Y. He was 180 degrees opposite to whom he was during the record. He was back-slapping, glad-handing, "You're beautiful, babe, this is all great." And as soon as the album was finished, I took my wife and child to New Hampshire to see them play at an outdoor gig. And after the gig, I just wanted to go to aboard the bus to say hello. It was like 100 degrees out there. They went into their bus, and that's the last we heard of them. We stood outside the bus for about an hour.
Wow.
In the hot sun, in the dust, waiting, just waiting and waiting. Not a word. And then in the ensuing years, I hear that he has a radio show and he's talking shit about me all the time. Mm-hmm. And then he's got this book, and it says, "Oh, I ruined the album." This is simple. This is low class behavior.
And so,
you got a problem with me? Then have me on. I emailed him twice.
Right.
I emailed him and I said, why don't you let me come on your radio show and at least tell my side of the story? What is your problem? Nothing. Never heard a word. JJ, we remained in contact, but generally this was a very disappointing band for me. Right. Very disappointing, and the second biggest record I had.
So let me see if I can take some positive out of it, because We're Not Gonna Take It is ubiquitous. It's one of those songs that is bigger than genre, bigger than band, bigger than era. It's been around, and kids that are 3 years old now could probably sing a verse from it because they hear it all the time, whether it's at a sports venue or at a mall or wherever.
I just heard it on Chris Matthews last night.
Yeah, you see? and I Want to Rock. And when you heard those songs and you had to work with those songs, did you think, wow, we've got something special? Or do you sit back now in 2015 and go, I just don't understand how those got to be so big, damn it. I don't get it.
Oh, no, I like the band, I like the band. I said, I can work with this band. I can help this band. I can help this band deliver hit records, make a hit record. This is okay. They were a challenge in many regards musically, but I enjoyed working with all of them while we were working. We had some severe challenges. We had some severe problems that we finally overcame. I mean, getting a really good sound on JJ's rhythm guitar took 3 days. And it was a nightmare, but we got there, and enjoyed the record. Loved the Captain Howdy trilogy. I thought, Dee's a smart guy. He's a creative guy. He's got a lot of energy. He's got a clean lifestyle. He's got a little of that Ted Nugent dictator thing to him, but much better to have a dictator, straight edge guy than a junkie. So I enjoyed working with them all. They were a tight unit, and they really had their hearts in it. They were a good band, all for one, one for all. But that's not what I felt afterwards. I just felt confused. I was completely, the only way I could explain it is that Dee Snider, I guess he was there, one of the founders of the band. I'm not sure what the history is. I know JJ was there. But Dee worked very, very, very hard as the writer and the director of the band and the image maker. And for 7 years or 10 years or something before we made that record. And bang, we got a huge hit record, sells 5 million worldwide. They're huge, they're big. This is what makes them. And he's looking at people who mention my name and saying, wait a minute. I've been doing this for 10 years. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this band. This guy comes along and you give him credit. And I think that's why he said he said all those negative things about me.
Yeah, which
because he was there. He was there at the mix.
Right.
Every time we put a song to bed, he approved it. So he really has no leg to stand on when he says, "Oh, I hate this. This sucks. This isn't the way we would have done it. We have to re-record it now." And and he says, I made him do certain songs. I don't have the power to do that. I'm a hired guy. They're paying me.
Right.
They could fire me.
And I would say, I would argue, even if you made them, you can't deny the success. I mean, if you made them do "We're Not Going to Take It," or you made them do "I Want to Rock," or whatever, hey.
No. His argument is he claimed I can't be specific, but he claimed that I didn't want them to do "We're Not Going to Take It," or I didn't want them to do "I Want to Rock."
Okay.
If it happened, I certainly don't remember it. And guess what? I don't have that power. I can't say, no, you're not going to do that song. We're not recording that. They hire me. I'm a hired hand. And there's a number of guys they could have hired. It's like, we're going to pay you. The label's going to pay you on our behalf, and you're going to help us make this record. Oh, you don't like that song? Well, we really like it. We want to do it. Am I going to say no? Did I call Doug Morris, the president of Atlantic Records, and say, hey, they want to do this song, and I really don't like it. I don't want it on the album.
Right.
That doesn't happen. People ascribe power to record producers that we just don't have.
Well, I think when you look back at the history, a lot of fans of that genre will talk about Bob Ezrin. And Bob Ezrin seemed to have been the kind of producer where he would come in and say, this should go this way, this should go that way, you should put a piano on that. And they saw him, or at least that's how I perceive it. From what I hear, there's sort of a different approach. Maybe people think that because one guy does it, every guy,
No. Listen, Ezrin's great.
Absolutely.
And we all say you should do this, you should do that. I hear a Hammond B3 here behind those power chords. Let's try it, but you're going to do it.
Right.
Either you do it or we don't cut the song. We don't do that. Producers can't be cast in that role. They can't operate like that. Now, there are certain producers who are iconic.
Right.
Who, you do not second guess George Martin if he brings in an orchestral backing arrangement.
Gotcha.
You do not second guess Roy Thomas Baker if he brings, when we're dealing with something like Bohemian Rhapsody. Who could do that?
Right.
Or Trevor Horn, or Tom Dowd, or Arif, or Jerry Wexler. or even Jack Douglas. You know, but then there are guys like me who did not earn the right to be dictators and who had no interest in being dictators.
Right.
You know, it's like, listen, we got to do what Werman says we got to do. That didn't happen, and they knew that.
Now, I know that we said we'd speak for an hour, which gives us 20 minutes to go, and we haven't hit some of the trilogies yet. So let me get to those. And I was going to ask you about Love and Hate, and I was going to ask you about Dokken and all that, but
Yeah, sure.
let's get right into Motley Crue first. Shout at the Devil, Theater of Pain, Girls, Girls, Girls. You've been working up until then with bands like Cheap Trick, with bands like Ted Nugent, which I would say are somewhat, at least on stage, less eccentric, less visual than Motley Crue. And how was it on that first album, Shout at the Devil, when the record company says, "All right, you're working with this band called Motley Crue"? Were you expecting anything from them? Were you excited? Was it like, oh boy, what the hell is this?
I was not. I was not convinced that they were as good as they were. I went to see them. Someone sent me the Too Fast for Love album, and I remember saying back to them, "This is not really my cup of tea." You know,
right?
It was a little too sloppy for me.
Right.
So, but I, the circumstances about that album or around that album were, I was leaving Elektra Records because I couldn't really get along with the new president.
Right.
Because he wouldn't let me do my job. He wanted to drop Motley Crue.
Ooh.
And I, my cat's here.
It's all right.
All right, hold on. I gotta close the door here on my cat.
Right. So he actually wanted to drop Motley Crue. That's interesting because here we are on the farewell tour 2015. That would have been a really bad decision.
Yes. Well, that's another story. But my agreement to do Motley Crue was part of my exit agreement there. I said I don't want to be head of A&R anymore, and they said, well, will you produce 3 records for us? I said, okay, sure. So I didn't expect a whole lot from Motley Crue, but Shout at the Devil was the success of Shout at the Devil was a little bit of a surprise to me. I was neater and more. What would it be? I thought that Shout was a little grungy.
Right.
You know, the sound of the album. I would probably have made it more pop. You know.
Right.
Which is what I did with Motley Crue anyway. I'm not saying that I didn't make it more pop, but I generally tended more pop. The reason that I succeeded with bands like Motley Crue is because I could help them fashion single hits that would get on the radio.
Right.
And in the 70s there was AM radio and FM radio.
Right.
If you had an FM hit, you could sell a few 100,000 records. If you had an AM hit, then you could sell 3 million albums. So I'm the guy that the record labels turned to get these unrecordable bands on the radio. So that's why Doug Morris called me to do Twisted Sister. That's why Elektra wanted me to do Motley Crue, because they didn't really know what to do
with them. When you say unrecordable, though, is that just because of the music they were doing was hard to find a slot in the top 10? Or do you say unrecordable because here are these, and it's been widely publicized, out of control drinking, drugging guys, musicianship, is that what you mean by unrecordable, or do you just mean
Well, a lot of times labels would wind up with bands that and they wouldn't know what to do with them. It's like, okay, now we have this band. How are we gonna make it hit? And there were record company presidents that would ask me to do things and would say, it was as if they didn't know how the band got on their label. Doug Morris said, I've got a band here. They're doing pretty well in Europe, but I can't get them arrested in the United States. You're the only guy who can make a hit record with this band. Please do them. So of course you did them, because you don't turn down a record company president.
Right, of course.
And that's the same thing that happened really with Motley Crue and with Poison. Although Poison had some success with their first record.
Right. Which I happen to love their first record. I mean, you did open up and say, "Aw."
Yeah.
With, and just going to ask you, with Motley Crue, fans have debated for years, is Nikki a good bass player or is not a good bass player? Is it convinced sing, convinced not sing? When you heard them and you had them in your studio, did you say, okay, wow, this is true. What am I going to do with this? Or do you think, yeah, no, these guys are perfectly fine. I don't know what people are complaining about.
Well, it took us It took us 3 or 4 hours to do a bass part with Nikki on Shout.
Right.
Now, granted, he had broken his shoulder, so it was a little challenging for him to play bass. But by the time we got to Girls, 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 he was an accomplished bass player. I just adjusted our time schedule to allow for a whole afternoon to overdub the bass part. I didn't think, Vince and Nikki were not, in the beginning, were not that really that accomplished at their craft.
Right.
Tommy and Mick, I thought were amazing. Nikki became great, and of course he was the creative engine behind Motley Crue. He was a great writer. He was a great lyricist. He was a brilliant image maker.
Right.
Look what he did. It was truly astonishing, for a high school dropout. But his bass playing, it improved over the years. Tommy was a brilliant drummer right off the bat, and I think Mick is one of the most underappreciated guitarists I've ever worked with.
Yeah, it's true. When you look back to the 80s and you think of the guitar heroes, and you think rightly so of Eddie Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, and even Warren DeMartini from Rat, you go, okay, George Lynch, yeah, okay, I go. But nobody says Nikki, not Nikki Sixx. Nobody says Mick Mars. You go,
right.
But he's great.
Well, look, Mick has a particular. He's a really, really great rhythm guitarist, and he's like Keith in a way, because Keith is not a technician.
Right.
He's a feel guy, and he comes up with the most brilliant guitar riffs in the history of rock and roll. I think Keith Richards. The signature Stone guitar riffs are without parallel. Without equal. Mick did the same thing for Motley Crue. All the albums that I enjoyed doing and did really well with have very, very prominent rhythm guitar licks, like, Cat Scratch Fever, for instance. These are that or oh God, there are so many.
Tooth and Nail, or
Tooth and Nail. George is another story. George Lynch was pure genius, I think, on guitar. We didn't get along so well, but he was and is. He's probably the best. He's probably the best lead guitarist I ever worked with.
Uh,
Georgie.
George
You know,
George is great.
the the solo to the song "Tooth and Nail" is stunning. It's astonishing. Nobody played a solo like that I ever heard, except Eddie.
Yep.
You know?
I'm looking at the time tick away. I'm getting nervous here.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. We have time. I have 20 minutes or so.
All right. So let me just quickly, because I want to get into Cheap Trick, and I don't want to gloss over Motley Crue too much, but the sound changed from Shout at the Devil to Theater of Pain to Girls, Girls, Girls. It certainly went more into that pop element, more radio friendly. Was that your influence, or was that a record company influence, or was that just Nikki Sixx saying, "Hey, man, I want to be on MTV more"?
No, it was part me, and it was part technology improving.
Okay.
It was part Tommy got into programming drums, sampling,
Gotcha.
electronics, stuff like that. And Mick finally got a very competent guitar tech.
Gotcha.
Who helped us achieve a really good guitar sound that I liked very much. Like the guitar sound on Girls, Girls, Girls is where I wanted them to be.
Yep.
They did a little bit of changing along the way. That's all. I think that the sound that we came out of the studio with on Shout was appropriate for Shout. But by the time we got to Girls, Girls, Girls and Wild Side, I thought that was a great sounding record.
The band also re-recorded Shout in '97, and Nikki Sixx has said on record, blah, 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 Tom Werman, yada, yada, yada. Why do you think he feels that way? Why does he not appreciate what was done and the sounds that, you go
You'll
to the...
You'll have to ask him.
Is that annoying to you, though?
I'm sorry.
Is it annoying to you that you have these great success? Okay.
Of course. It's not unusual for rock stars 20 years down the line to look back and say, well, he didn't really have our sound down, and he didn't really do this right, and he didn't really do that right. I have to remind everybody that at the time when they were selling gazillions of records, it was all, "You're beautiful, babe. We love you. This is fantastic." I mean, Nikki, we were fine then. I spent time at his house. The night he was declared dead and released from the hospital, we went out for sushi. Literally that following evening.
Right.
We were fine. 20 years down the line, there are certain things that a band, who used to be much bigger, they're looking back and they're saying, man, we didn't get here, we didn't do this, we didn't achieve that. We're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame yet. Let's blame the producer.
Right. Right. But you go to their farewell tour.
What we didn't achieve may have been partially his fault. So,
right.
I'll just say, well, he didn't do it. It was Werman.
Well, it's weird because I saw 3 farewell shows, and the set list, which was static each night, was essentially 2/3 or even more songs from those 3 albums.
Right.
So
look at
can't be that bad.
There is a very it's a little awkward for me to say this, but it's something that I couldn't help but notice over the years, and that is that with every artist I worked with, the hit artists, there were 7 bands that I worked with who had gold and platinum records. Every single one of them had their biggest record with me, and the one following that if I stopped working with them, or if they asked me to stop working with them, they disappeared.
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
And yes, it's boastful, and yes, okay. But the fact is that I took these bands. Somehow, these bands made it to the top of their career, of their creative, achievement.
Field or whatever. Yeah.
When I was working with them, and
Well,
when I stopped working with them, they stopped being successful.
Well, I'll give you that for most of the bands. You look at Cheap Trick, from Dream Police to All Shook Up. Yeah, there's a big drop off. To some of those other bands, Motley Crue, Doctor Feelgood.
Dr. Feelgood is the one exception.
Right.
It was a brilliant record, and it sold more than Girls, Girls, Girls. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Right, and then Twisted Sister, from Stay Hungry to whatever came after. Okay, I'm with you there, but all right, Cheap Trick.
Ted Nugent, same thing.
Yep.
Cheap Trick, same thing.
Poison.
Molly Hatchet, same thing. Kicks, same thing. L.A. Guns, same thing. Poison, same thing.
Yeah, these are all bands I wanted to talk to you about, but let me get to Cheap Trick. And then here's what I find interesting about Cheap Trick. In Color, Heaven Tonight, Dream Police are the winning trilogy. They'd never have matched that. They've done some great stuff, but it's never been that. They have complained about your producing, but only on In Color. You never hear them complain about Heaven Tonight. You never hear them complain about Dream Police. For some reason, In Color is the big bugaboo. They had Steve Albini recut it a few years ago. Blah 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 blah.
Well,
strange.
There's no question that that sonically, In Color is nowhere near as good as subsequent albums. It was a little sludgy. It was a little tame. It did not capture the ferocity of that band. I'm absolutely agree with that. Recording technology has changed. We didn't feature the bass as much then. There were records just didn't sound the same. For Rolling Stone to call In Color Album of the Year, does that mean that Dave Marsh didn't know what he was talking about back then?
Nope.
I mean, come on. This, yes, it could have been brighter, punchier.
Right.
And they do have a right to complain about it, but it was all of us. It was a mutual thing. Unfortunately, we had to sign, at their suggestion, the band and I signed an agreement to not talk shit about each other.
Back then or now?
Any negative. So I can't really go into this because I would be violating the agreement. But I just, I do not accept the responsibility for everything that didn't happen in Cheap Trick's career.
Okay, so negativity aside, I think it's a great album. I mean, Big Eyes, I Want You to Want Me, Clock Strikes 10, Southern Girls. I mean,
yeah.
Cheap Trick, to me, Mitch Lafon as a fan, does not exist if those songs aren't in the catalog. Those are essential Cheap Trick songs.
I agree.
Did the record company, because the first album was a little more esoteric, a little more left field, did the record company say, listen, we've got this band, they're sort of quirky, can you make them more of a cuddly, friendly pop, something that mom would like to? Was that at all
no,
any of the...
No.
Okay.
Record companies don't do that, really. No label ever called me and said, we would like this kind of record from this band. Please do this for us. Please take them in this direction, take them in that direction. Record labels just weren't that creatively aware. They kind of left the A&R people and the producers, especially independent producers, alone. They'd say, we want you to make this record. Go make us a hit. The only time that didn't apply was with God, it might have been Glass Tiger, because they were on Arista, right?
I believe
And
so.
yeah. And Clive said, "I don't hear a single. I want," and that's when we did. What did we do? Oh no, it wasn't Glass Tiger. It was Crocus.
Ah, Crocus.
That was the only time I heard from the record label that there was no single here, and we want you to keep going until we want more songs.
It's
Otherwise,
interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
no. Otherwise, we didn't hear from labels. They just accepted the record when we delivered it and said, "Yeah, great."
And it's interesting that you say that, because I've read those autobiographies. I've read the interviews, and there's always been this perception or this narrative put out there that record company had AOR guys and they said soften this and put keyboards there, and I've heard it from, I mean, whether it's Kiss or Cheap Trick or Motley Crue or Whitesnake or whoever. I've heard these stories, and
Oh,
you're saying it's just not true.
right. That's
Oh,
what I'm saying.
okay.
Never happened to me, and I was the one who was producing the records. Nobody ever called me and said, I don't know, this record sounds too hard, or this isn't hard enough, or they just they left it up to us, really.
Okay.
They may have said we didn't have a good we need a power ballad on this record, or
Right.
that you okay, we'll try to get you one, but not the whole tenor of this album isn't hard enough, or it's too pop, or it's too hard, or it's not black enough, or it's not white enough, or whatever.
See,
Didn't have,
I
didn't
have a
have.
tendency to believe that for the '70s stuff, but I almost don't believe it for the '80s stuff, because there was a lot of image conscious stuff with Poison and Dokken and Motley Crue and MTV, and I could really see sort of a you know a PR gathering where they say, okay, we need to have this, and get that power ballad, and okay, so I'm surprised that it wasn't happening, especially with those bands. All right,
Yeah,
Heaven
yeah,
Tonight.
yes,
As we run
great,
out of time, um,
great record. Oh,
great,
we
great.
still got time.
All right, well, you just tell me when we're done, because I got a million more. Um, Tell me about working on that record. You had In Color. It did okay.
Yeah.
Now looking back 40 years ago, you go, wow, that album must have been multi-platinum, blah, but it wasn't. It was
No,
okay,
it's probably platinum by now.
right, by now,
Uh,
but not then, because
right,
when
right,
when we think of the past, we sometimes forget to place ourselves in the past. We think of the past from the 2015 perspective and go, oh, it
right,
must have been mad.
right.
Um, was there
Well,
any panic with Epic in terms of we got to get this band going? How
no,
was it approaching Heaven Tonight?
no, it was. I don't remember anything different. The only problem with producing Cheap Trick was that they were a big road band. They were a great live band, and they had a very good agent, and they were always working. So we had to get the record finished so they could go out on the road. And we did Dream Police in 30 days,
Right.
start to finish, mixed everything, which was tough on me, and it was probably tough on the band. And then it sat on the shelf for 8 months while Budokan, sold gazillions. No, there was there was no difference. The label didn't say anything in particular in terms of direction when we went into the studio to do Heaven Tonight.
I was just going to say, what's amazing about Cheap Trick is that they still have the same work ethic. I mean, here we are 45 years later, and they're still nonstop touring, nonstop on the road, nonstop working. Um, I Want You to Want Me, which was on In Color. It didn't set the world on fire. Then
Right.
Budokan hits.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, that was what started the whole controversy, the whole argument between me and Rick.
Right.
Or in the press. We never talked to each other
Right.
about it directly, but the fact is that I remembered one thing. They claimed that there was another. They claimed that I put the tack piano on the record without their knowledge. They were there. I remember turning to them and very specifically at one point and saying, "What do you think?" And Rick said, "You're the producer." And I remembered that because that's the first time anybody had said that to me.
Right.
And I remember what studio we were in, and I remember what time it was, and I remember who was playing the piano. And I asked him to do it because it was a little dance hall ditty. It was obviously not a hard rock song as it was presented.
Right.
And nobody kicked up a fuss. Nobody made any objections. It was recorded, it was arranged, it was played, and it was mixed, and it was turned in, and there was no problem. 20 years later, whoa, boy, did that suck.
Big problem.
Who did that? You know, I mean, these. I gotta say, you get blindsided by this kind of thing, and the only defense I have is that they were there.
They were there. When you heard the live version back in, I guess, '79, and you saw it explode, did you take pride in that? Did you go, "Oh, I should have done that," or was it like,
No.
"Oh, no, okay"? Did you remember hearing it the first time on AM radio or FM radio, thinking, "Wow, that's pretty sweet"?
Well, yeah, I liked it very much,
Right.
and I understood the difference between the version that we had recorded and their live version, but they didn't stop the tape. They didn't stop and say, "Wait a minute, this isn't I Want You to Want Me. This is how I Want You to Want Me is supposed to sound." It just didn't happen.
Right.
I never heard that version. I'm sorry. They didn't say that about the other songs. Just about that song. And that, strangely enough, that happened to be the one that, that was the big worldwide breakthrough for Cheap Trick. I am puzzled by it, just as you
are. When you started working on Dream Police, Budokan had blown up. I think it might even have delayed the release of Dream Police. You had a different band. They're in color. There are these rookies. At Heaven Tonight, there are these road dogs. And then, whoops, Budokan, now they're the superstars. What was that like finishing the Dream Police album? Were they more active in the studio saying, "Hey, we sort of know what we're doing now because we have this big hit"? Okay.
Yeah, Rick was more involved, definitely. He was writing string charts. He put strings on one song down at big RCA studio on Hollywood Boulevard. I can't remember which song it was. It was either Heaven Tonight or Gonna Raise Hell. I was Gonna Raise Hell.
Right.
And
Dream Police has a strings version and a no strings version. If you look at their 2006 reissue of it,
right.
There were two versions of Dream Police. So strings seem to be.
We had strings on our Dream Police, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, you did, and then they later on reissued it in 2006 with a the bonus tracks kind of stuff. So,
right.
Robin Zander, to me, one of the greatest rock singers ever. I mean,
the man of 1,000 voices.
Absolutely. Any good Robin stories? I mean,
no. The only Robin stories I have are he would come in. We'd get to the studio. We'd have a little lunch. We'd roll tape at 1:00, and by 3:00, he would have done 2 lead vocals, 2 doubled lead vocals, and all the harmonies on 2 songs. And we'd be sitting there, mouths open. How does he do it? I mean, he was just unreal in the studio. Unreal.
Best singer you ever worked with? Is he the best singer you ever worked with?
Oh, without question. without question. Yeah, far and away. Um, there were days when, I mean, look, I love Vince, but
Right.
Vince, Vince said himself, he had a great quote to some interviewer at one point. He said, if it weren't for Motley Crue, I'd be the guy who was bringing you your beach chairs. He said, and we had a couple of days when Vince, who was a pretty good singer at the end, he never prepared for the studio. He partied hard all the time. He would come in, like from an all-nighter, and he'd put his time in front of the mic. But he was much more difficult to get a great performance out of than Robin. Robin was just amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I start wrapping up with these three quick fire ones. Blackout in the Red Room by Love Hate. It is one of the most underrated albums. I think it just fell through the cracks because of the changing tides and stuff.
Could be. And also because Columbia paid them way too much advance.
Right.
And there was very little left for tour support.
Okay.
Why do you think they call it Dope? I think is one of the great things I ever did.
I mean, it really is. So I don't know. I don't want to say, are you proud of the album? But do you think that it is all it should be? Do you think that?
I feel bad.
Right.
I feel badly because it wasn't a hit. There are certain bands like Mother's Finest and like the Producers, my two very, very favorite disappointments, commercial disappointments. They're brilliant bands, both of them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, there's hardly anyone who can touch them. And they're cult bands. I can't believe that they weren't huge hits. I feel most badly about them. I feel almost as badly about Love Hate because, they were no less serious. They put their hearts into it, and they were very good and very dedicated, and it didn't happen. And I always bear part of the blame for that, or responsibility for that, for any failure and any success.
Right. Poison, Open Up and Say Ah, is the band.
Yeah.
And another one. They were criticized back then for not being great vocalists, not being great guitarists, blah, blah, blah. But I love Poison. And when you put those four guys together,
right.
It sounds right. I mean, they replaced CC DeVille for a while, and it technically sounded better, but it didn't sound better to the heart. You know what I mean?
Well, they are who they were. I never brought in a ringer. The guys did their own work. Ricky Rocket once said to me, "Look, I know I'm not the greatest drummer in the world, but I'm trying."
Right.
And he would sit there and he'd pound it out and he'd work and work and work, and he enjoyed what he did. CC was the same way. But he probably wouldn't admit that he wasn't the greatest guitarist in the world.
Right.
But they were all. I enjoyed them. They worked very hard. I never had a ringer for anybody, and people always ask me, "Did they really play all that? Is that really Ricky Rocket on the drums?" Yeah, we just worked hard. That was it.
There we go. I'm going to finish with this. We'll talk about Dokken in a part two.
I'd love to do a part two. I really don't. I don't know if I deserve to have a part two, but
I do. I think you do.
There would be no time limit, and we'd plan it so that you didn't feel there was time pressure. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I don't feel it as a time. I'm just trying to get everything in because there's so much. There's 60 albums.
There's a lot more, yeah.
But, you look at Jack Douglas, you look at Bob Ezrin, and they had their go-to guys. They brought in Dick Wagner, Steve Hunter, Alan Schwartzberg, all kinds of great studio musicians that worked the scene. And it wasn't until years later that you go, oh, Dick Wagner was on Destroyer. Oh, Steve Hunter played on.
Yeah, I didn't know they had ringers either.
Was that something that you ever got into with any of the bands? And without naming names, did any of the albums
Never,
have redubs or anything?
never,
Never.
never. Not once. All of my guys played. If anybody else played on a record, they got credit on the sleeve, and they
Okay.
did not play what my bands played. They
Okay.
didn't play drums, bass, guitar. Only two. I had Lukather come in and play on one Cheap Trick song, and Jay Graydon come in and play on another. In fact, that was I Want You to Want Me. And when they did, they got credit as guests. I
Okay.
never replaced anyone, and that's why I'm pretty proud of what we did, because
Were you ever tempted to replace anybody and say, I could phone, I
oh
could phone
sure,
Dick Wagner and he could really have mopped this up?
yeah, right. I mean, I had like sure, who wouldn't want to work with Steve Lukather
Right.
on every album?
Right. He's
you
great.
know,
So
come on.
so when we look back at the Cheap Trick stuff and the Poison and the Black Love Hate and Dokken, and it says Tom Werman produced, we know that we're getting whatever it is, the four guys, the five guys, the whatever amount of guys, we're getting the real deal.
Absolutely, without question.
That's the way it should be, and that's a good thing to hear. And there you go, hour and 15 minutes. That'll do, and then we'll talk about the dysfunctionality of the Dokken camp at some other point. No,
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I really enjoyed speaking with you, Mitch, and my apologies for any time pressures.
nope, none
And
at all.
please do schedule a part two. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely, and very much looking forward to it. And I will pass along your best wishes to Alan Frew.
Please,
He's
yeah.
definitely in my thoughts.
And to the guys in Cheap Trick, and to the guys in Motley Crue. I did speak to Nikki a couple of months ago. He called me. It was very nice.
Okay.
As far as Dee Snider goes, good luck. Okay.
I'll mention it. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. And there you have it, folks. My interview with producer Tom Werman. I certainly hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, because I certainly enjoyed that. Hopefully, we'll get to do a part two very, very soon. Remember, check me out on Twitter at Mitch Lafon. Head over to the One-on-One with Mitch Lafon Facebook page. There's also a One-on-One Twitter. There is also the show that you can subscribe to on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, whatever your fancy may be. Thank you once again for listening. I will be back next week next episode, we've got Steve Vai coming up, Ross the Boss, who was formerly in Manowar, and a bunch of other great guests coming your way. So keep listening, and thank you. Bye for now.